So please welcome to the stage Adam, Openoms, and Bastien.
Thank you.
Where shall we see?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Anyway, cool. Okay. Maybe you guys can share that one. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks very much for joining us. So we're going to be talking about Lightning and privacy, and so. I guess just for anyone who doesn't know our panelists, well, Bastien, you probably know if you're here earlier today. He's at ACINQ and he's working on Lightning, the protocol, and also, on ACINQ products and software. We've got Openoms here. He's most well known for Raspiblitz and also has a strong focus on privacy and open source. So he's very well known in the Bitcoin community for that also. And Adam Ficsor, known for his work on Wasabi wallet and Coinjoin work and other Bitcoin privacy work. So our panel today is about Lightning privacy. So I know, Bastien, you've got lots of things to share on this, and you did your talk earlier today. So maybe if you could start with a bit of an overview on what are kind of the high-level concepts for us to think about, and we'll get the other gentlemen to add their thoughts.
Great, sure. So in Lightning, there are basically two very orthogonal privacy pain points. The first one is how you ensure that your on-chain activity cannot be linked to your off-chain activity. And there are a lot of attack vectors right now on that, and there are a lot of ways we can make it better, and we will make it better in the future. And then the other side is once you are completely in Lightning, how do we guarantee the privacy of your payments? And that's an entirely separate discussion where the mechanisms are completely different as well. So there are also privacy issues there, and there are also a lot of things that we can fix and that we will fix in the short-term to mid-term future.
Right, so yeah, thanks for the presentation earlier. It was very excellent. Some takeaways. You've been mentioning that Coinjoin is not like a complete solution to this, but I do think that it's still a very important thing to use funds which are, my use case there are a couple of ways you can use a Lightning node, right? If you are aiming to start a routing node, I think, and if you are also concentrating on privacy, then the best way would be to just use all funds to be coinjoined, to have them detached from the history of the previous history of the source, and then there are practices to be followed, best practices with very strict coin control, because as you have pointed out as well, when you're opening and closing channels and you're using a change from a previous transaction, then you're obviously exposing the ownership of these funds. Because what can be seen publicly on a node, that it is the capacity, but there is no information advertised on the Lightning network about how much, what is the ratio of the funds belonging to one peer or the other, right? So you're opening a channel, it is not known from the blockchain data, or at least the opening transaction, who opened, which peer has opened that channel. So you could have loads of incoming liquidity and have no coins under your ownership, but then later on when you are closing the channel and you reuse those funds to open another one, you expose that part of your that part of the amount which came out of the closing transaction was all yours, and then obviously it will be known that the channel you opened, it was your transaction as well, because only you were involved with both transactions, right? So it is very difficult to manage that. The only way would be to use very strict coin control and basically open wallets from an external, open channels from an external wallet, and also set delivery addresses or a kind of closing addresses separately for each channel, which go to an external wallet as well. And then, they would be ideally swap the coin joins, one by one, to avoid merging these and, exposing this information.
Yeah, and one point that I want to add to that, for people who didn't see my talk previously, I mentioned that right now, Lightning kind of defeats the purpose of Coinjoin, because after your Coinjoin, we still advertise and we still relink your UTXO with your node ID. But that's something that we can fix in Lightning and that we should fix in Lightning, because once we remove that advertisement entirely, then we break that link. So then it makes a lot of sense that if you do a Coinjoin before opening channels, then you will not be leaking anything apart from to your channel counterparty. So once that is fixed in Lightning and you have good coin control, then it's a good idea to use Coinjoin. I wasn't saying that it's a bad idea, just that it can be a foot gun if you're not doing it correctly afterwards on the Lightning side.
So Adam, let's get some of your comments. Do you have anything to add there? And maybe as you're working on Coinjoin wallets as well, do you have any thoughts around the possibility of combination there? Because right now it's pretty much you either have wallets that do Lightning or you have wallets that do Coinjoin. You don't really have something that combines the two. Is there a possibility for that in the future?
So let me preface this that I'm fairly new to Lightning Network privacy, and I'm sitting with titans here, who are not. But I spent the last month on reviewing stuff, and I'm still trying to comprehend many things. But what I think my takeaway is that privacy problems. So the privacy of the Lightning Network is not terrible, but not great, and privacy problems start on-chain, but they don't end there. However, all the on-chain problems can be fixed by Coinjoins or Coinswaps or what else? Is there anything else? Payjoins maybe. Yeah. So I think it's as I was looking through the research. All the research started with identifying the Lightning Network channel openings and closings from on-chain data, right? And of course, private channels you shouldn't be able to identify private channels, but since public channels tell you have a list of public channels, those are pointing to the on-chain transactions. Therefore, the remaining ones are the private channels, and that's what some researchers exploited. Now, they won't be able to do this with Taproot, but I think we are going to talk about that later, maybe. And yeah, I think there is no other way to start Lightning privacy but with Coinjoins or other privacy techniques on-chain. Do you guys agree with that?
Okay, so yeah, just for anyone who's following along, just to explain a little bit of the conversation, when you open your Lightning channel, you're still doing a Bitcoin transaction. And so what we're talking about here is, are there ways to minimize or eliminate that fingerprint such that you can't necessarily tell that? And then I think the point going on is also that if you were to close a Lightning channel, you receive a change output. And then if that change output is then used in the creation of a new channel from that point, could you get doxed from that point? So that's one of the things. Now, I've heard, as an example, and I'm curious, maybe this is the next question for you guys, Lisa of Blockstream from the C Lightning team has mentioned this idea of V2 channels. And so the idea would be you might receive back a change output, but if you then do a dual funding channel with somebody else, your next channel partner, then maybe that's cutting against the heuristic, the common input heuristic, such that you can't necessarily tell from the change output, that was Bastien's node, or that was Openoms' node. Do you have any thoughts on that idea? Does that help, basically, having a pay join or a V2 channel open?
Yeah, I think it does help a lot, because simply the fact that it introduces deniability is already helpful and makes your anonymity set bigger. And this dual funding proposal builds on top of an interactive transaction construction proposal, which means that it is in theory possible to make every Lightning channel opening be an aggregation of many unrelated channel openings. So you can just do some mixing in every channel opening that you would do in the future. And that's that's a great thing to add to the protocol. And it's the same for splicing, which is also a derivative of this dual funding, is that you can afterwards, once the channel is open, you can modify it, you can take funds into it and outside of it with a new on-chain transaction, and you can build this transaction interactively to use PayJoin and to scramble to mix where the inputs are coming from and where they are going. So I think this is going to help a lot to blur the privacy line when you're dealing with on-chain to off-chain exchanges.
Yeah, so I'm absolutely a big proponent of the dual-funded channels. They do not only make the chain usage more efficient, because you are creating bi-directional liquidity with one transaction. When you're opening a dual-funded channel, where the balance will be on both sides, because both peers are contributing to the transaction. But also, there is this basic assumption, which is called a common ownership heuristic, which was before dual-funded channels existed. We could always assume that a channel was funded, even if it was multiple inputs, it is always coming from one of the peers, right? So that is we can assume that all the inputs of the transaction would come from one peer. That is common ownership heuristic, and dual funding is completely messing this up, because now you can never be sure which peer. It could be it could be only one peer, or it could be two, but yeah, there is no assurance on that.
And it could even be more than two. Just to give an example, for example, with this protocol, you could, in a single transaction, have Alice open a channel to Bob and a channel to Carol, and every one of these bring inputs to the transaction. There are many outputs to the transaction, and someone watching the chain doesn't even know that there are multiple channels. Every one of the outputs could be a change output for someone, or a Lightning channel, or anything else. You can just put it normal payments as well in that transaction. So just the fact that there's this possibility means that you can build channel opening transactions with many inputs and many outputs, and it would be really hard for attackers to know what's going on there.
So let me just ask a question, that the problem that we are trying to solve here is that right now, because of how Bitcoin works, the adversary can tell exactly the channels, all the channels that belongs to one person because of the clustering. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, and also particularly knowing your change output. So then they can sort of start saying, that was Adam's node. I can see he's the one opening a new channel, because maybe up until that. So let's say, walking it through, let's say you did all the right things. You run your Lightning node on Tor, you coinjoined, and you put those coinjoin funds into your Lightning node. I open the channel to you, Adam, as an example. And then let's say we need to close that channel. And then now I receive a change output, and then I open a new channel to Bastien. If someone's externally watching, they might be able to, at that point, start clustering and saying, I can see that's Stephan's node because he's using this change output for his next channel to Bastien, as an example. I'm just giving an example. So I think that also brings up the question and the point that will it cost more to be private on the Lightning Network, or what other trade-offs are involved? Is it maybe there's a reliability aspect, right? You're only on Tor, maybe your payments won't be as reliable. What do you guys think? Will it be just more costly to be private, or is it like a reliability trade-off? What do you see there?
I think that on the funding side, on the on-chain to off-chain privacy at least, I don't think it becomes more costly to be private. It can even be less costly because you pay less fees for these optimized transactions. There's a cost in the coordination between the nodes, because the building such an interactive transactions has issues. If you start trying to open a node to both Bob, Carol, and Dave at the same time and want to aggregate all these into a single transaction, if one of them just stops responding in the middle of the protocol, it blocks all these channels, so you have to abort and restart with only the other ones. So on the liveness kind of thing, it may take more time to be able to really open that channel, but it will not cost more fees. I think it will actually cost less fees, so it's really worth doing it from a user's point of view.
So if I had to maybe summarize that, it's almost like there's more of a coordination problem. And actually, that's probably a good question for Adam, right? As a Coinjoin wallet, you probably have to deal with these coordination issues. And you would understand the technical aspects of it more, but as I understand, you might have Coinjoin participants who want to register their output into a round, and this is all like Chowmin blinding and so on. Could you explain a little bit there? What does it look like if, say, a round fails, or maybe that participant is not able to join for one reason or another? Is that essentially the sort of thing we're talking about here, like the coordination aspect of a Coinjoin?
So I'm not sure I fully understood the coordination issues here, but as far as I understand, we can do Lightning channel openings and closings with Coinjoins, but I think they are only efficiency cost optimizations, right? So if you Coinjoin before and you Coinjoin after, that will cost more transactions, but doesn't improve the privacy, but certainly something that we have to pursue because, well, cost optimizations on the blockchain is something that we always have to do. Yeah.
Anything to add, Openoms?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of savings for channel opening, for example, in the current state when we don't have Taproot implemented. So the biggest saving you can do when you are deploying liquidity to a routing node or to a Lightning node is to do batched channel opening, which is a big. You're merging the inputs, but you're also merging the outputs. So that is very bad for privacy because you would all know that all those channel balances belong to that node, right? So it will be all tied together. So that's something to be avoided if you want to operate privately. But you can do a saving feature, or you can do a type of transaction which would be a sweep kind of transaction when you are not creating a change output. So it would be a smaller transaction. So that would be a kind of a saving as well. It's a smaller saving than the batching, but that's very useful to kind of use a Coinjoin output, for example, and just sync off it all to a channel. And that would, there would be no change which would follow you along. So that is very useful for privacy. And then from there, you can do something which is, again, coming back on chain, which would be a submarine swap, when you would create a UTXO, which would not be tied to your own node at all. It will be coming from a third-party service, or as we could see, it could be, any of your peers with the service we have been introduced to the peer swap idea, when anyone could be like a submarine swap service. So, yeah, that's a form of a coin swap, basically. So there you can create another UTXO, which you spend from your Lightning balance, for example.
Yeah, so it's an interesting point there around batching up of things, and that perhaps in the batching up of things, where actually some of what previously might have been leaked in terms of on-chain data, maybe that is now being taken off the chain. And now maybe, as an example, let's say you're a merchant, you have multiple channels, and you push back, you like loop out, as an example. You push all the funds out and you take it back on-chain. That's an example where it's not necessarily to the outside observer. Now, in this example, let's say Lightning, the Lightning loop server would know, right? But the outside observers might not. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts or comments on that.
Yeah, not necessarily. Like yes, if you connect to the loop service through Tor, it wouldn't be exposed to your IP address, and it's not known where the off-chain payment is coming from. So actually the loop service is not aware who was paying the invoice, which the loop server would only obviously aware of the receiver address, which it's not necessarily tied to the paying Lightning node. So that is very good. And then this same applies to a service which is available now for any kind of Lightning node, which is a boats.exchange, which is the same thing. You just don't need to run the client for it, but you can just go to the website and pay a Lightning invoice and receive an on-chain like a UTXO in return.
I think, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's just loosely related. That something pretty cool that I realized with Lightning Network is that, Lightning Network is essentially a huge coin swap with a bunch of people, because you're opening a channel and payments are getting routed all over, and somewhere else on the blockchain you're closing another channel, and like that's coin swap, basically. So that's pretty cool. Now, if it could be completely anonymous, like Tumblebit or something, and then it would be the pinnacle. But I think maybe we can get there. There is so much room for improvement. I'm amazed by Lightning.
Yeah, that's cool. And in terms of, so we're talking about Lightning privacy, what about this idea of maybe not everyone's trying to be Edward Snowden? It's like, who are you trying to be private from? So it might be, and I think I've seen Jameson Lobb comment on this idea as well, maybe more from like an OPSEC point of view of, should you be trying to be private against, say, a random general public person? Should you be trying to be private against, say, a private investigator who's not well-resourced, and maybe a private investigator who is well-resourced, and then maybe next level up is sort of more serious investments. So do you have any thoughts on that? How private, what's kind of possible today versus what might be possible in the future on the Lightning Network?
Okay, so I mean, there is a big difference here. So we are covered pretty much the on-chain aspects of the Lightning and the on-chain transactions, but then there is the problem what you are advertising, obviously, and then in the invoices as current you are exposing your node ID, which is then tied to all of your channels, and then depending on your on-chain footprint it might be tied to all of your balance as well, or at least the initial balance of the channels. So to be in a position of a payer, like a spending node who would have only unannounced channels, for example, that has much better privacy than like a BTC Pay server, a merchant using BTC Pay server who is exposing their node ID to everyone who is receiving and who is asking for an invoice, for example. And this is true if they are using LN URL, a Lightning address, or if they are just using a static QR code or anything. That the outcome is always comes back to the Bolt 11 invoice standard, which does include the node ID.
One important thing to realize is that right now it's quite easy for attackers with a lot of funds who run a lot of nodes on the Lightning Network to be able to correlate a lot of stuff. It will become much harder once we move to point time lock contracts. But one thing that's important to realize in your threat model is that if you are using a phone, if you are using a mobile phone, all the people you will be opening channels to, they know a lot of things about you. They know that when you send a payment, you are the payer. They know that when they forward the payment to you, you are the receiver. And this is going to happen with the same node ID all the time. So if you are in a model where you don't even trust your peers, you really need to either run your own node and just connect to that, and this node will have to be a routing node so that the payments that you send through that node could come from anywhere, or the payments that reach that node could go anywhere and other people don't know about it. Or you would need to regularly rotate the peers you create channels to, but that can become quite expensive very fast, because you would be opening and closing channels all the time, which costs a lot of on-chain fees. So I think that if your threat model is that you do not trust any peer in the network, the only solution that you have if you want to use a mobile wallet is to run your own node and connect only to that node with an unannounced channel, or use just a mobile remote
control, like a Zeus,
yeah,
Spark.
exactly.
I mean, this is true, but it also comes down to very much to what this threat model is, so who you want to be private against, right? So, for example, you could use a custodial wallet as basically, which acts as a mixer, because all the anonymity set of the payments is all the users, or basically all the payments which are happening through that node. And in the
but you're not hiding from the custodial.
Exactly. So the custody, that Lightning node would know everything about it, like in a, for example, wallet of Satoshi. But the outside observer couldn't be able to identify who is the user who was paying, who was receiving there. And this is something which is, in further developments, this would be very nice to solve with a Fedimint model, where the users of the custodial or even federated custodial node would be private from the maintainer of the node as well. In case of if it would be a Fedimint, if they would be using Chum and eCash in between each other, right? But that's something to be looked forward in the future.
Yeah, I'd just like to emphasize what Stephan was saying, that it's very important in privacy that you know who's your adversary. Is it your neighbor or your government, right? And maybe one more thing is that Lightning Network has an interesting property in terms of privacy, that in some sense, as the network grows, the attack, some of or most of the attacks gets more and more expensive. So should we really care about that, or should we just call those mitigated? Because many of the existing privacy anonymity systems they are mitigating the privacy problems by making the attacks more expensive. So yeah, I think it would be good to know which problems that the researchers are bringing up we should care about or not, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting point, Adam, because I haven't checked actually recently, but what is it, 20,000 or 25,000 Lightning nodes out there on the network today? What number does that have to grow to until that becomes, okay, now there's 200,000 Lightning nodes out there. Does that make it now much more difficult for the chain surveillance firms of the world to, as you were saying, to create these nodes across the network and try to interpose themselves inside the routes so that they can read the payment hash and try to do what's called payment correlation, right?
I think though that growing the number of nodes doesn't really protect you more, because it's more the distribution of the capacity that's actually useful. So having a lot of new nodes that don't have a lot of capacity doesn't really grow the anonymity set. So we must understand that it's not because the network is huge in terms of number of nodes. If the capacity is still concentrated between too many nodes, you're not protected by all these new very small nodes that are not actually routing any payments. So what you want is to have a network with a lot of big players that bring a lot of capacity to the network.
Yeah, so that's very important. You want to increase the number of the hubs or the big routing nodes where the payments are going through. And I mean, there's an aspect that there should be ones which are anonymous, or at least, like privately run, so they cannot be kind of, subpoenaed by a state agency or such like that. And also, if we are now getting into trying to survey the Lightning payments, I mean, there is obviously Lightning has like a huge advantage that it is off-chain. So all the payment activity and the routing, the routes the payments follow is not recorded on a blockchain, which is then available to be surveilled or analyzed later on. But only like kind of real-time surveillance can work, right? And not many would have, especially with the increased number of channels, the increased number of activity, not many have the resources to be able to record, like snapshot the Lightning network. Like typically the research articles are using simulated networks, for example, with like 200 nodes and such. I mean, we are very much like 100 times of that, right? And also there are techniques applied to try to minimize the ability to do that as well. So for example, you can make assumptions that, for example, LND would aim for the most efficient route, which would be the cheapest and the shortest from their view. So, and you can assume that is what's happening. But for example, C-Lightning does intentionally, within a max specified fee, it would randomize the route, so it's not always paying through the most efficient one, which might be, so there's a trade-off there. It might be slightly more expensive, but you gain privacy from that. And then also another thing, if I just like looking into what C-Lightning does in these terms, that there is this shadow route idea, which then would hide the destination from the last hop, because there would be other kind of virtual hops put into the onion routed payment, which only the destination node would know that it is actually was destined to that node, but the previous one would expect that there would be multiple hops further on, right?
Like padding of the that message, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Anything to add? Oh, yep.
Yeah, just a quick note on the off-chain to off-chain case when you're paying. In that case, yeah, it's really easy to just pay a bit more fees to avoid the most efficient route, just avoid the route that looks most obvious, and then just taking some detours across the network, you guarantee a much better privacy because you break all the heuristics of people trying to guess what would be the most efficient path and then trying to trace it back if they have multiple nodes on the route. So that's a very easy way to thwart this kind of attack and very easy to implement as well. It's just that the user has to pay a bit more fees for that.
So we are talking about the routing and stuff, and there are two kinds of Lightning Network nodes, like private and public. And the public ones are, those are routing, the private ones are routing too, right?
It depends.
They can, but,
they can.
But you cannot imagine a system where there are only private Lightning Network work nodes and everyone can still pay with everyone. So I think that's important because that kind of means that we have to concentrate on the public nodes. We have to make the public part of the Lightning Network private, and it's not enough if we just mess around with the private part. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a good point. And so I'm also curious as well what your thoughts are that, Openoms, do you want to add something?
No, I just want to clarify that this idea of being private or public, that it is more like being announced on the network, in the gossip network between the Lightning nodes. Those are the public channels which are being announced, and the private channels are the unannounced channels, but they could get out. So the information, for example, if someone is receiving a payment, would be included in the invoice, and then that information about that channel would be published, but only to the ones who have the invoice, right? And also these channels can be probed, etc. So they are not really private. That's why it's better to call them unannounced, but that's not how it's written so far. And the other aspect of like privacy in terms of the internet layer, right? So you have nodes which are running on Tor only, and you have ones which are running on a public IP address. So they basically have their physical location disclosed. So that's a big difference as well. To have like a big routing node you are paying through, are they public in the sense that they have a disclosed location or like tied to a public company, or are they just an anonymous user? Because obviously Lightning Network is completely permissionless. You can start a node and you can open channels to most of the nodes, really. So someone can join with their liquidity without exposing themselves as the entity behind it, right?
And that also brings up, in my mind, this question of, okay, so let's say right now, if you're a more advanced user, let's say you're Openoms or you're, whoever, and you do all those steps to try to be more private. What's the future going to be like? And we're speculating a little bit. Do you think it's going to be like in the future, you have to be an advanced user to be private on the network, or are you sort of hoping that if we get, say, trampoline routing, blinded routes, or route blinding, or other improvements, that privacy is actually achievable for the, let's say, average user? What do you guys think?
I really think it's very achievable for end users, even on mobile phones, and I really encourage people to look into route blinding and trampoline, because I think those two combined can help a lot the privacy of payers and receivers. And as for but it's a separate thing from the on-chain privacy. As for the on-chain privacy, I think this one may be a bit more expensive for users because you need to be more technical to do that. It's really hard to build an easy UX that still gives you enough flexibility to build the right thing. But for at least the payments, once you are onboarded on the network, I think this part can be easily private for most users without being technical at all.
I think the biggest kind of easy to reach development would be the application of Taproot, so the implementation of Taproot into Lightning channels, like using Taproot outputs, because that would make, as Adam said, you basically, from the Lightning closures, there are not many other wallets or setups using that kind of 2-of-2 multisig, which is a Lightning channel, and is being exposed when the channel is closed. And all the public channels, so you can basically subtract and estimate the number of private channels then. But if these are not appearing on the blockchain as 2-of-2 multisig, but just as any other transaction as it is the case in Taproot outputs, then the anonymity set of the private channels would suddenly grow to all of the Taproot transactions.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting one for what Jonas Nick was talking about earlier today, how by combining the anonymity set across Lightning plus other protocols that use Bitcoin, that they might be made to look all the same. And so that's that same aspect of eliminating the heuristic there. So any other thoughts around Taproot and what it might enable for privacy?
Yeah, I do. This is something I think I got it right. So, well just quick recap on Taproot. In Bitcoin we have script, and usually we are using pay to script hash, pay to witness script hash. That's your normal Bitcoin address. Now there are more advanced scripts, and that's what the Lightning Network is using. But with Taproot we can actually hide in the collaborative case that it's a more advanced script. Not today, because even normal wallets should start using Taproot in order to like really look the same. But in the future, when things get onboarded, then it they won't be able to tell if it's a Lightning Network opening or anything else. Now, this is cool. There is still a problem, which is that the public channels are pointing to that UTXO, the exact UTXO that Taproot wants, that Taproot is hiding. That's the information that Taproot is hiding, where the public channels are pointing to. So that's cool. That's not cool, but at least we don't expose the private channels anymore. Just what I was talking about before, that the researchers did, they identified all the Lightning channels on chain, and then they looked at the list of public channels, and the remaining are private channels. Now they cannot identify the Lightning channel openings on chain anymore with Taproot. So now it's like, which ones are private channels? They can just filter them out. Now, even with the public channels that they are pointing to the UTXOs, Jonas Nick was talking about some magic that I couldn't comprehend, that maybe they don't even need to do that. So that would be really cool, because then we would really not have too much information, at least from on-chain data. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a change that I hope we'll see more research. Rusty just proposed the overall idea to say, yeah, let's just stop announcing when we announce channel. Let's just stop pointing to this exact UTXO and publish some kind of proof that I have opened something in the last like 20 blocks. There are a lot of subtleties to get that right, because you want to avoid people still using heuristics to figure out which output was yours. But I think that there are ways we can make that work, and it will get much better than what we currently do.
Okay, so I have a question. So let's assume that everything is anonymized on chain with Coinjoins. So is it really a problem if the public channels are pointing to?
I think the issue is that if you do that, you're revealing your capacity. So you're attracting people because they will see that your node has a lot of on-chain capacity, which is something that you may want to hide. You still want to show that you have enough capacity to attract payments, to route payments. But if, for example, your node has a lot of capacity, like 100 Bitcoins of capacity, maybe only telling the network that you have 10 Bitcoins of capacity is enough to incentivize people to go through you, and all the rest is actually there when you need it to route, but you don't need to show people that it's there. For example, the example I took is that if you want to have a lot of capacity with a specific node, instead of opening one big 100 Bitcoin channel with them, you can just open one Bitcoin channel with them and private other channels with redundant capacity, so that you have a lot of capacity to them, but you don't tell all of that to the network. You only dox a small part of it, just the part of it that's enough to attract payments.
Excellent. All right, well, we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. So last question for each of you is, if you could think of one improvement, I'm going to give you one improvement for Lightning privacy. It has to be sort of realistic. What would you pick? And it could be, maybe it's a specification thing, or maybe it's like a practice that you wish users would do. Do you have any, if you could pick one?
I'm going to shield my own stuff, but route blinding.
I think it's very important to to hide your IP address to start with, right? I mean,
So Tor only. Run your node on Tor only.
Yes, Tor I2P. I mean, unfortunately, it might induce some delays, but there's something we need to live with, because otherwise you just putting your banknotes out on your window, as I've said before.
So, since this is the last question, I think I'm going to just go ahead and do the announcement. You guys might be wondering what I'm doing on the stage with the Titans, and your question won't go unanswered. I think it's not a secret that Wasabi Wallet would really like to get into Lightning Network, but we really have to make sure that it has to be as private as it can, or at least we can exactly tell that what are the trade-offs when using Lightning Network with Wasabi Wallet. And for that, we figured the space is going so fast and things are improving so fast that maybe it's not a good idea to start implementing stuff yet for us. Just wait a little bit. But we want to go into researching the Lightning Network privacy, and for that we figured out that we have a 1 Bitcoin grant for Lightning Network researchers that you can apply. You can go to blog.wasabiwallet.io and apply to the grant, where the main objective is to design a privacy-oriented Lightning Network client with some conditions or some easiness that we consider the on-chain part done with Wasabi Wallet. Or Wasabi Wallet 2.0. So you don't have to care about that. And you can assume some technological advancements in the future which might otherwise tie your hand, which is probably everyone will be always online and always on in the future. So I would really hope there are some Lightning Network researchers here and apply it to the ground. Hope it's announced already. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, I think that's all we've got time for. So everyone give the panelists a round of applause, and I'll hand it back to Alexandra. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.